Hi, this is Fran Mayer. Welcome to another Napa Institute podcast. I'm delighted today to have as my guest Dan Cellucci, who's the CEO of Catholic Leadership Institute and a fellow Philadelphian. Philadelphia is one of those places that's an acquired taste, but if you acquire it, it really is an addiction. So Dan, welcome.
Well said. Thank you, Fran. It's great to be here. Honored to be a part of it.
Great. Well, Napa, as you know, Dan, has a particular interest in helping the church be more effective, finding ways that lay people can do that. I mean, you see it, you see the effectiveness of the church. I'm not talking about necessarily efficiency, but effectiveness of mission, as you are. We have a particular focus on lay people. You have a broader focus on clergy and lay people together trying to make the church more effective. What's your target audience at the Catholic Leadership Institute? And in your experience over the years, what are the major challenges the organization and you particularly have had to face in the work?
Sure. Well, so Catholic Leadership Institute is approaching 30 years of service to the church as an apostolate. And really, our purpose remains the same from 30 years ago, which is equip all leaders in the church with the best that's out there to help them accomplish their God-given mission in life, whatever that might be. So our target audience is anybody who's in leadership in the church. We tend to have a particular emphasis just in the way that our ministry has evolved with our bishops and our priests, as well as, I would say, lay leaders in professional roles in the diocese and parish. So that's where the bulk of our ministry tends to focus. And so that's been an evolution. We actually started our first 10 years. We were founded by a priest in Philadelphia and Tim Flanagan, who had a joint partnership really to start training young adults in their leadership call to the church. So that's how I got involved more than 15 years ago. But what we found very quickly was we were firing up young adults, getting them excited about their faith, giving them leadership skills, and then they were going back to a parish where, frankly, the pastor didn't know what to do with them. Mm-hmm. Either overwhelmed or maybe a little threatened or whatever it might be. And so we realized very quickly we had to check out what was going on in the priesthood. And what we were seeing was that priests were saying that they were leaving the priesthood in some cases within 5 to 7 years of ordination because it wasn't what they signed up for. They were most of their time in leadership roles when really they had been prepared for and thought they were really entering into a life of what they would say is ministry. Obviously, we know the threefold office of a priest or bishop is to teach, sanctify, and govern. So governance isn't separate from the priesthood, but it certainly wasn't getting the attention in the seminary. So that's when we pivoted to working with priests. And actually, it was Bishop Chaput when he was in Denver, who was kind of the first bishop to take us up on that, really. And then from there, that ministry kind of exploded. And to date, we've worked with probably about 25% of the active diocesan priests in the country, about half of the bishops, and about 100 different dioceses in the US and Canada. I think as with any lay apostolate that's been around for 30 years, you certainly just learn and deepen your understanding of the church and hopefully your love as you go as well of the church. And so I think as we've kind of gone from each chapter of our evolution, we've learned things, we've been challenged by things. I think the great news about our apostolate, or what I'm most proud of, is that I think we're highly adaptive to what the church needs and what we learn, what we continue to learn, and how we continue to grow. So.
You know, one of the things, Dan, that I noticed, because I was with Archbishop Chaput in Denver, and then, of course, I came with him here to Philadelphia. He was kind of a pioneer with CLI in a sense, because, and I want to ask you particularly about this, I think that there seems, in my experience, to be an anxiety among some clergy that somehow they're going to get taken over by the laity, or that the introduction of corporate techniques are somehow going to compromise their sacramental nature. Could you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, well, and you know, I don't think that that's all unfounded. So I would say I think they have some legitimate reason to be skeptical, and I appreciate that. And I would say if we even look back at, you know, the program that we did in Denver, we still have today called Good Leadership Shepherds. It's on its 7th iteration. You know, when we first rolled
it's really good, by the way.
When we rolled that out in Denver in that first experience, it was highly secular. I mean, it was based primarily out of a corporate lens on the church. I think one of the evolutions that has been I've most appreciated about being a part of this ministry is you actually learn about the sources really all in the church's documents. I mean, there are beautiful documents in the church going back centuries and also going back, you know, weeks to how we are to lead. And so one of the learnings we did after those first initial cohorts, certainly priests found value in it, but we did get some of that feedback. This is kind of feeling a little secular. We took a breath and said, let's really look at what the church is about leadership. And there's some great stuff. So we pivoted to saying, instead of kind of baptizing some things like corporate things Catholic, let's actually start with the source, which is why I love Napa so much and going, is because I think so much of what I learn when I go to the conferences or events is really some of the source documents and tradition, and then see how corporate things might apply to it, meaning where we don't have any daylight, where they go together. And so that was learning for us. But I think that's one of the tensions, right, of the church right now, is that we certainly have to start with the source. But I think God puts in front of us lots of different opportunities by way of human innovation to put it for the use of good or for evil. And I think it can be put for the use of good in the church. And I think that's always been the adaptation that we've been trying to go on, is to start with the church first, and then to see what else out there kind of matches and aligns with what we're called to do in our faith.
When we were talking prior to the interview, Dan, you made a point that I think you really need to develop, because people need to hear it. One of my main focuses in my work for Napa is how do lay ministries become more effective? But the lay vocation is much larger than going out and founding a lay ministry or organization. Well, I mean, in your case, how do you live your lay vocation properly?
Yeah. And I think before I even give an answer, I want to talk about this is really Dan Cellucci talking about Dan Cellucci's challenge to do that. I think one of the things that I've constantly tried to discern in my 15 years in this apostolate is what I'm doing professionally for the church somehow sabotaging or having me sacrifice what my primary vocation is as husband, father, son, brother, in the world. And I think there is a question that we have to ask ourselves. I have to ask myself is, at a certain point, as much as I like talking to you, Fran, or talking to the folks at Napa, or talking to Legatus chapter, am I just talking to people who want to hear what I have to say? Or am I talking to people who really need to hear what the Lord has to say, right? And so I think I have to ask myself, I think we all have to ask ourselves that question. It's great to be fed. It's great to be in a place that with like-minded people, but really the power of the lay vocation exists in the world. I mean, that's really what we are called to as I continue to learn. And I always say, like, one of the hardest things that I've ever done as a Catholic leader is trying to organize the community service project for my daughter's first Holy Communion class. The reality is, in that situation, right, I had a choice. I could say, you know what, we're just going to kind of do something. Everybody's going to have feel-good moment, and we're just going to go through this as kind of easy as possible. Or, and I think I tried to do this, would like another shot at it one day, but I kind of understood the fact that, look, I got parents who are going to help me. What am I doing to help them come to know the Lord? I got these kids who are going to make this sacrament that's the source and summit of everything. Am I just having them do a service project, or am I connecting it to really the bread of life, right? Yeah. And so we go through these daily motions in our lay vocation, whatever it might be, and I don't know that we take all the opportunities that the Lord puts in front of us to really maximize the power of that vocation. I always say to different groups that I'm speaking about, I have no problem giving witness to my faith to you all. I have yet to have a conversation with my older brother. And so, I think there's a healthy tension that we always have to wrestle with, where if we go into and are blessed to be in professional service of the church, are we neglecting really what is fundamental about our discipleship, which is to be out in the world?
That's a really critical point. I've noticed exactly the same pattern in my family. Sue Ann, my wife, was a Catholic school teacher for 40 years. I've done some version of this job for 42. But translating that into a relationship with my kids is a really completely different experience. Dan, in terms of, one of the things that you focus on is organizational effectiveness. I need to ask you about, from your observation, what makes an effective lay organization or ministry? And part of that, of course, is what makes a good lay leader? What are the marks of a good lay leader? So could you talk a bit about that for a moment?
Sure. And so I think when we're talking about a lay ministry, and I'm going to use it kind of the lens of an apostolate, there's different lay movements and things. Obviously, there are lots of different categories. But I think when we're talking about kind of lay apostolates, from my standpoint, clarity of purpose is really, really important. Knowing what you're saying yes to and knowing what you're saying no to. When we made that shift that I talked about earlier from working with young adults to working with priests, we made a very definitive decision to say, this is what we're going to be about, no matter how hard it is, no matter how maybe ill-equipped we feel at any given moment, and maybe no matter how many people reject us, this is what we need to be about, because we really believe we're being called to that. I think one of the dangers that we can run into, and certainly even in CLI's 30-year history, we've had chapters of this, is we're effective at one thing, and therefore we think we're effective at everything, or we should go to, and there's lots of different needs in the church. Choosing your lane and really being clear about it, a strong sense of discernment of purpose, I think is really important. The other thing that I think I have been so blessed by in the way Tim founded this and my predecessor, Matt, what Tim really wanted to do was create the best of a ministry, or what people think of when they think of a ministry, and the best of a business. So I think we've always really benefited from a very strong board of lay people who really do hold us accountable, who help us think through things financially, organizationally, operationally, strategically. We constantly are looking for improvement. So we have a culture of debriefing, of constant renewal. So we're never thinking that we've got it kind of covered. We are always, whether it's me with my staff or me with the board or our staff out in the field, we have a culture and a practice of debriefing and of constant improvement. And I think that's really important too. Sometimes apostolates, they say, kind of come and go with the times, but I think part of what happens is they don't stop to really read the times, read their effectiveness. They kind of have an outdated or nostalgic view of themselves. And so you have to kind of keep a perspective of what others are perceiving from you, how effective you're being now, as opposed to maybe how effective you were 10 years from now, and be willing to make difficult choices. I think one of the things that's not a happy part of my job, but is an important part, is sometimes we have to be involved in helping bishops or pastors make difficult personnel decisions, right? Letting somebody go who's not qualified, or figuring out how to make cuts. Those things are difficult. I think
nobody wants to be the bad guy.
Nobody wants to be the bad guy. The reality is, being a good steward of the church is not making sure that your apostolate is a charity, meaning you can offer charity. Mm-hmm. And offering charity is very important, but charity shouldn't be offered through, for example, positions in an organization. And sometimes we fall into that trap in apostolates as well. Like, gosh, we're a faith-driven organization. We can't possibly make changes to staff. I don't think that that's true. I think that those things are not necessarily connected. The difference is, how do you make those changes? How do you set people up for success? How do you help them maybe go to their next chapter? That's how we define ourselves as Christians, not do we make hard decisions or don't we make hard decisions. So those are some of the, I think, the pitfalls. And again, certainly we've fell into them at times, but hopefully learned from them. And I think those marks are marks of a good lay apostolate. I think marks of a good lay leader kind of follow suit. So having difficult conversations, being vulnerable, being willing to say, I don't have all the answers and I need other people's perspective. I think one of the things, we were talking about also lay founders. One of the things that I think I am so proud of with CLI is our founder. And for those who don't know Tim Flanagan, and I know you know him, Fran, he's one of the most humble people that you'll ever meet. And I think one of the metrics of success, by way of how good of a founder he is that probably a lot of bishops don't know who he is. And that point of saying, it's really never been about Tim. It's really been about how do we help leaders in the church, right? So you can't match CLI specifically and only to Tim. It's so much bigger than him. And in my role as CEO, I want to make sure I kind of follow suit, because it's very easy to become kind of the personality or figure, and that role is important. But I think a good lay leader is creating lots of those folks, lots of those witnesses for the church. And I think Tim deserves a lot of credit for doing that, because I think he's done it really well over the last.
Yeah, Tim has accomplished a great deal. And if you meet him, you wouldn't know it because
Yeah,
he doesn't lead with it. He's a pretty extraordinary guy in that way. And
he is.
I think the other thing too that I've noticed, I'll give you two examples. I mean, Tim is a great leader, and my former boss, Archbishop Chappie, was a great leader. Very different personalities,
Yeah.
but they shared certain things, it seems to me, which is that they encouraged cooperation. They brought people in. They were very grateful when people did a good job. One of the things I noticed with the Archbishop, and I've never forgotten it, was his extraordinary openness to new ideas and his extraordinary willingness to kill a bad idea if it didn't work,
Yeah.
which is just as important.
Well, I was just going to say, Fran, I mean, what I appreciate about, having had him as our Archbishop for 8 years, and I told him this, is clarity. I mean, in my experience of the church, so much of our challenge is a fear and a failure to kind of land the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And look, it's a lifelong journey, right? We're not going to get it right 100% of the time or even close. But when you don't land the plane, you never know. I mean, you never know if you get it right or you don't get it right, right? And so I do appreciate that he spoke with clarity on everything from ideas to different situations, but like you knew where he was going, and you could disagree with that, or you could say, well, gosh, I don't appreciate that, but there was no question, and I think people really need that right now in this time of just craziness in the world with this pandemic and all this stuff. People are desperate for some clarity and a path forward, and I think so. A good lay leader provides that. A good archbishop provides that, and I think isn't afraid of the fact that when they land the plane, people are going to have a hard time with it. That's part of the leadership, though. I mean, I always tell people, when you're getting pushback, that's not necessarily a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're creating a change.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing something wrong, but the reality is, people are recognizing that you're changing something or doing something, and they're having a reaction. You can help them move through that reaction, but the worry of a potential reaction shouldn't stop us from making decisions or initiating action. And that I see a lot in the church.
One of the things I noticed, pardon me, one of the things I noticed in Denver, Dan, this was many years ago, but we had never had a reduction in force for budget reasons. And the Archbishop did one. And the great fear was that he was going to be alienating major donors. It had exactly the opposite effect, because the donors saw that he was a responsible leader and they stepped up financially.
Yeah.
And so those hard decisions that you make with dignity really do come back at you in a positive way if you do it with charity and dignity, obviously.
And they should never be easy, Fran, right? I mean, anybody who has been through that, as I've been through that, as the Archbishop or bishops have been through that, it should never be an easy decision. It should never be, you're affecting somebody's life. But I think we are sometimes our best kind of rationalizers in trying to decide why we can't take an action that needs to happen. And I think what ends up happening, right, is that exacerbates the situation over time, and it makes those decisions get even worse to have to make, right? And I pray constantly when he was in office for Archbishop Chappie, because he inherited a situation in Philadelphia that was, I think, a lot of deferred decisions over time, in my estimation, that I think don't help anybody in the long run, right? I mean, I think we can kind of justify it all we want, but making some of those tough decisions is a part of leadership.
What is the right chemistry in lay clergy cooperation? I mean, there's a huge amount of positive language about how we mutually respect and cooperate and blah, blah, blah. But I mean, in fact, it can be a difficult kind of situation. So what's the right chemistry? How do you learn that chemistry?
Yeah, I've kind of boiled it down, Fran, I think, to, and I think we could say this for society in general, but I think it's certainly true in this dynamic. In either case, so clergy or laity, I think if we come at it from a rights-based mentality as opposed to a responsibility-based mentality, I think we're getting it wrong. So there are clergy and there are lay people who come at me in my role, first and foremost talking about their rights. My right in the church in this role is X, or as a lay person, I have the right. And it's like, okay, but let's go back to the ultimate model, right? Jesus Christ. And he sacrificed all his rights. I mean, in his public ministry. and it was more about a sense of responsibility. So I think one thing that we can all do is, before we talk about rights, and rights are important to understand, but I think we have to say, okay, any right comes with a responsibility. So yes, the baptized have rights, but they also have responsibilities. Yes, clergy have rights or authority, but that comes with a greater deal of responsibility. So I think kind of leading in those conversations out of what is my responsibility in this situation, as opposed to what is my right in this situation, I think leads to more authentic collaboration. I also think that I do think we have to look at some roles in the church, particularly in the diocesan infrastructure, that I think, for historical purposes or kind of evolution, were always kind of held by clergy. They don't need to be held by clergy. And if I may, the role that you played for Archbishop Chaput, I think is a valuable role. And you're not a clergy, to my understanding. So I think there's some assumed constraints that we also have, again, both laity and clergy, that get in the mix, and we need to really kind of deconstruct those and say, what is really in the teaching of the church, and what is the background or need for this to be a role held by a member of the clergy or not. I think lastly is probably this idea that we really don't understand each other's lives. When we started working with priests, we had this idea, we're going to gather 30 guys in Denver, and of course they already know each other. Of course they already have friendships and relationships. By and large, that's not what we found. I mean, we found in bringing 30 or 40 priests together from a given diocese, in some cases, this was the first time they were ever having a conversation with each other. Part of that is because they're living, alone, they're isolated, they might be having a great, expanse of geography, right? So we have all these ideas in our heads, or my mom's, famous one about, like, well, Father says he takes a day off on Friday. Like, what does he do the rest of the week? So this understanding that we just don't understand, their lives. On the same token, I sometimes get lectured about spiritual fatherhood from some priests, and I'm a father of 4 people.
Yes.
And I say, look, Father, I love the metaphor of fatherhood in the priesthood, but let's carry the metaphor all the way through, right? Do you understand that fatherhood involves a 3-year-old vomiting on you in the middle of the night, and you have to hold them anyway? Like that's, so just, when the heater breaks or the air conditioner breaks, that's on you. Like, you got to figure that out, right? So I think we could do a better job of understanding our lived experience as from clergy understanding lay people, of lay people understanding clergy, because what a priest would experience, for example, in ministry in the course of a week, deaths, life management decisions, right? All this type of stuff, I may not experience in 10 years in a lifetime, right? So they have a certain situation. I have a certain situation. I think that understanding, that's where I think you see really good collaboration, is when those kind of aspects are in place.
Yeah, I have to tell you the story that I've thought about this many times, about the genius of my former boss's leadership. I always thought it was immensely interesting that he had a chief of staff who was a layperson, a longtime worker on his staff, because he could have a voice of a layman, very close, married, kids and all that. But there was another reason, Dan, which is, I'm not even sure he was conscious of this, but I was eliminated from clerical ambition. So I like being a layperson. I don't want to move up. It was the best job I ever had. And it was that combination of wanting another voice, but also very clear judgment about, is a person going to fit in a way that I don't have to worry about that person anymore? It's really pretty interesting. I learned a lot from him in terms of just basic leadership.
Well, and I would say, Fran, one of the biggest roles I think hopefully we play and add value to for the clergy that we serve is that role. I mean, they might not have a you full time, but I think part of what I'm asked to, and this is another kind of large systemic issue in our church. There's such a total lack of feedback particularly among clergy, but I would say even among lay professional staff, that sometimes a bishop just kind of wants to say, like, what do you really think about this? Tell me what you really think, right? And to have somebody close, because priesthood can be lonely, right? Being a priest can be lonely, because in many cases, in many parishes, you're the only priest in that parish. But my goodness, a bishop even more so, right? In many cases, you're the only bishop in the diocese. And that's hard, right? I'm blessed with a board of directors that feedback, gives me mentorship, gives me advice if I want it or not. I'm blessed with my wife who humbles me regularly, whether I ask for it or not. So there's constant points of feedback and connection to me that kind of help keep me grounded. And it's very easy if you don't have that to kind of lose direction, lose focus, lose perspective. And so I do kind of feel for our pastors and our bishops about that.
Yeah, I think a layperson needs to have, well, they need a lot of different qualities to be really useful to a bishop or to a pastor, but one of them is a lack of ambition, ecclesial ambition. There's good ambition, but the lack of the need to lead. And the second thing is discretion. You really do have to know how to keep a confidence confidential. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. But I mean, because you're dealing with a lot of very sensitive information, and one mistake can really hurt a lot of different people.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I just have two quick other questions, Dan. You made a comment offline a while ago that bishops sometimes are nervous about lay organizations and donors, and what do those concerns about lay activism boil down to as common themes among the bishops that you've talked to?
Yeah, I mean, and I think part of their, I would say, with most of the bishops I get to interact with, they actually are very favorable toward lay apostolates, lay involvement. I think generally speaking, they want that type of engagement. I think one of the things that they are nervous about, and I think with some degree, understandably, is if particularly donors or folks are trying to push a certain agenda in their mind, and they don't feel like they know what that is, and they don't feel like they're going to be able to kind of reel that in if it gets kind of out of hand. So one of the things we know from working with clergy, priests and bishops for over 30 years is they are extremely by nature risk adverse. Yeah. And so Archbishop Sheppey is not in that category, but the majority really have a desire to mitigate risk as much as possible. And formation as well, I would say, is really a formation for a priest really focuses right now on being kind of a caretaker. So caretaker kind of sounds good, but caretaker can kind of be like, let me hold on and just protect so I can hand it over to the next.
Right.
But in a highly disruptive environment, caretaking might not be sufficient. And so
it's definitely not sufficient.
so I think that sense of kind of motivations and trying to understand that, I think the biggest concern I think they do have, though, is there's so many, this is the good news, there's so many different lay apostolates out there. So how do they kind of curate and select and define which ones they're going to use, and then get their priests on board? I mean, that's really the concern, is like, I can only, and again, I think to a certain extent, this might be an assumed constraint. I can only kind of advance so many things at one time. How do I know which ones to advance, right? And so, they kind of see them as like, if we're doing this, we can't do this. In some cases, that's true, and there is a limit to what people can focus on. But in some cases, I think it might be an assumed constraint and a challenge that they face.
So my last question, Dan, you're very familiar with the Napa Institute, and it fits into this final question, which is, how do you diagnose the emerging future of the church in the United States, and how can lay people assist the church renewal and sustenance in these difficult situations? And particularly, what value does Napa Institute bring to that task of renewal and sustaining?
Yeah, great.
You got 30 seconds.
Yeah, right. So I would say, Fran, the last public speech that I gave before COVID-19 was to a group of lay donors, and need to just define the landscape of the church in 4 minutes. And this was prior to COVID. So I said, it's like we're sitting on a beach and there's a tsunami coming. And some of us are just kind of building our sandcastles. We don't even realize the tsunami's coming. Some of us see it and we've started to run, but you can't outrun a tsunami. Some of us has just put our hands up and said, like, take me, Lord, I'm done. And at age 38 with 4 little kids, I'm saying, does anybody want to learn how to surf? Mm-hmm. Because I think what's interesting, what's daunting and interesting,
that's a terrific image, by the way,
hopeful about our work is that we get to see these really daunting trend lines, right, that we're all very well aware of. But we also get to see kind of parishes and places that buck the trends.
Mm-hmm.
So the question always is in my mind, like, okay, the rest of the world's falling apart, yet we have these places that are growing, right? Parishes that are bringing 30 or 40 adults into the faith every year. So what's happening there? Well, they're surfing. and surfing, I'm horrible at it, but it's kind of this, you're trying to work the right timing, the right stance, you're trying to hold your balance, there's tension, right? You're gonna fall down a couple times, but this idea of we're gonna have to ride this wave, we cannot stop the wave. And now this was before COVID, so let me just tell you, the tsunami's here even closer and quicker. And I think Archbishop Chaput has said on multiple occasions, like, parish life as we know it was already something that was not going to be the same in the next generation. So what does the next generation church look like? What not only kind of for the next generation, but what is the next iteration of what we look like? We've always been a pilgrim people. And so I think what we have to do as lay people is understand that first and foremost, this is hard for our bishops and our pastors, right? One bishop said to me, Dan, back in the day, not that long ago, the plane kind of ran on autopilot. You just kind of got in the chair, and it went. He said, now you got to actively fly the plane while working on the mechanics of the plane at the same time. He said, it's hard to do. And they weren't formed for it. They weren't prepared for it, right? So that's where we are. They're good men. They have good hearts. They want good for their people, I believe. And so we have to help walk alongside them to define the roadmap on how we surf this wave, what the next generation church looks like. And I think where Napa comes in is bringing us back to the source, right? As I said before, bringing us back to kind of what is central, what is true, and what is out there. I think the other thing that Napa does so well is connect people. So what is out there that is bearing fruit, and to be afraid that some of these initiatives, some of these apostolates are going to fade away. And if that happens, the Holy Spirit's right driving us, right? So there might be new ones that spring up. We've always been on this journey, and I think we have to keep in tension the fact that we play a very tiny role in the course of salvation history, but it's our role. Like, we do have a role, and God has put us in this place for this time, and keeping that intention and realizing. So I guess what I would say is, let's stop trying to stop the wave, and maybe create a new wave, maybe create a new trend line, as opposed to trying to pull up one that just is tanking. Just let's start plotting a new course into the future that really starts with who we are as a people and who we've been called to be.
We're going to close it there. We'll edit it, I'm sure. But I just want to tell you, everything you've said is extraordinary, because I'll give you an example from our parish in Yardley, which was a dying parish 9 years ago when we got here. We got a new pastor about 3 years ago, and he just brought the place back to life. And here's the really interesting hitch. During COVID, our contributions went up.
Yep.
Because he cares. I mean, people know he cares, and he's involved. He's not afraid. He has a love for the parish. It's obvious in the kind of improvements that he's made, and he's available to people. And yet he's still a good leader. I mean, there's no question about who's in charge. He is. But that leadership skill that you teach is so absolutely critical, Dan, because or learn how to share with other people, replicate with other people. It's just absolutely terrific. So I thank you for your time. You've done a great job.
One of the insights I saw, we talked to a bunch of bishops during the pandemic, and one of the things that they brought up, it made sense to me, was that many of our priests kind of understand their priesthood in events, right? They understand how to be a priest in events. Mass as an event, the fish fry as an event, whatever it might be. And so this pandemic kind of robbed them of their tool, right? Like an event is something that people come to. And so the guys that you see that thrive, right? And it's kind of this winnowing, right? That we're seeing, like, we already kind of knew these guys were strong, but it's like you see this chasm. The guys who have been emerged strong, like you said, are the ones who are really relationship focused, and who understand that the primary thing here is not the event, but the relationship. And so there was this interesting good dialogue among priests, and younger guys were talking about being in relationship with their people on social media. And one of the older priests said, well, I can't learn that stuff. And the young priest was like, Father, pick up a telephone. Like, you know how to use the telephone. Call your people. Like, yeah. You're sitting at home, call your people. Like, that's fine. You don't have to use Facebook, right?
Our pastor called every family in the parish during COVID. Every single one. And he didn't connect.
And so that whole mindset, right?
Yeah,
it's not even the tool, Fran. It's the mindset. Like, am I in a relationship or do I do events? And I thought that was kind of a brilliant observation on the part of one of the bishops.
Dan, you did a great job. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'm honored.
A lot of fun talking with you.
Good. Yeah, you too. Anything else I could do, let me know.
Okay. God bless you.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.